The Kingdom Dreamers are proud to partner with Bluehost, the most powerful web hosting around. We love Bluehost and we'll use no other host for our website. Right now, Bluehost will host your website for only $3.95 a month. The perfect time to start that website you've always wanted or to move your website to a better provider. To get this deal, go to the Bluehost link in the show notes.
As I have a dream, and staggered by the winds of police brutality, you have been the veterans of creative suffering.
The ballot or the bullet
is to either ignore them or to deny them without giving details.
And we stand together to win the war.
One small step for man. Yes, we can. Can we all get along?
It's crazy out here. Welcome to the Wild Wild World Show, the podcast of conscious Christian conversation about the chaos in the cosmos, cuz we're all back. All the C's, trying to get the alliteration going for you. That's what good preachers do. So I'm trying to stay in my lane.
And writers.
That's also true. But we're back. Kellen and Will. You can catch us at kingdomdreamer.com. This is a Kingdom Dreamer podcast trying to reunite righteousness and justice. Kellen, how you feeling today?
Man, Will, I'm feeling all sorts of ways. I'm in all sorts of feelings. You know, I'm up, down, and all around right now. I don't even really know how I'm exactly feeling, other than I am glad to be here chopping it up with you today, talking to our people, you know. So appreciate everybody listening, checking us out. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you're at. Even, Will, the folks we ain't shout out in a while, our 2022 listeners.
That's true. We haven't talked to them in a minute.
We haven't talked to our future listeners, so we appreciate y'all coming back and checking out these archives like we know you will be, because we done blow up Shwaited. So appreciate y'all. You know, hope everything is going well in the near future there. But no, we're glad to be here. We got a lot to talk about, though. That's for sure.
A lot to talk about, which we'll get to in a second. But, you know, to catch us on Twitter, Kingdom X Dreams. Catch me at William R. Horn, HORNE. Kellen, oh boy, _K, _R. Can't even wake up for his own Twitter handle. You can support the movement at patreon.com/Kingdom Dreamers. Well, we do have a special guest today, man.
It's hard to wake up from my Twitter handle when yours put me to sleep, though.
Well, that's why I always say it first, so you can sleep through yours as well.
Y'all hilarious.
We got a special guest today. If you didn't notice, if you watch on the YouTube being like, why is there a third person? That's weird. We have a special guest today, the one and only Mel Reeves, to talk about an important conversation we have today. But you can catch. Well, go ahead, Kellen. What you got to say about that?
No, I was just going to say, you know, you are very generous because, you know, I know when people come on, you're supposed to call them special and everything. So I don't know if that's the case, but we do have a guest today.
Very special.
We have a guest today.
I don't put not special guest on the show. That's not worth my time.
We have a guest. We'll let you decide how special. No, I'm joking. And the reason I'm joking is because our guest today is Mr. Melvin Reeves, who happens to be my father. Now, before you skip or go to the next episode, please know we don't just bring family members on to the episode just because, right? I got homies that's always ask me, hey, can I get on the show? Can I get on the show? I always say, look, if you got something to bring to the table for our listeners, not just now in 2020, but our 2022, 2023 listeners as well, that's going to bring value to them, then we'll do that. Now, my pops has not yet been on the show, but that's not because of lack of value. That's just, life circumstances and things of that nature. But Mel Reeves, just so y'all know, this man is a longtime human rights activist and organizer and journalist. He's been on the front lines in my hometown of Minneapolis in the fight for justice in a long line of areas, and particularly when it comes to racial justice and more specifically injustice in this country. Well-known member of my community back home in Minneapolis. And he's also the editor-in-chief of the Minneapolis Spokesman Recorder. So this is not just, throw Pops a bone. This man is a leader. And if he grew up like I did in Minneapolis, obviously I grew up with him, but, many of my colleagues and friends and people my age grew up seeing him on the news, as he would say, raising ruckus when things have gone down. And as you guys know, things have gone down this week, sadly enough, in my hometown of Minneapolis. So I'm getting ahead of myself. But welcome, Dad, Father, Mel. I'm gonna try to call you Mel for the rest of the show and see if I can get away.
That'll work.
Oh, so I can get away with it. Okay. I didn't know if it was gonna work, but let's do it. So
it's gonna be funny. I think other viewers may find it kind of a little humorous.
I'll find it humorous, and look, thankfully we need a little levity in life right now with everything that's going on. But welcome to the show for the first time, Mr. Reeves. Thank you for being here. We're gonna bring you in 1 second, but Will, as we kind of alluded to, there's been a lot going on this week in the world. Those of you that maybe you had your head in the sand and maybe you listen to Wild Wild World to get your news for some reason. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that, but if you do, and maybe you've been busy with life, you may know that just in this past week, the week started off with a sad situation that at the same time didn't feel quite as serious, which was the Central Park situation, where a white woman was caught on film threatening to call the police, and actually did call the police on a black man, stating that I'm going to call the police and tell them that an African-American man is threatening me for the crime of asking her to put her dog on a leash, right? And so at the beginning of the week, that was, kind of, I don't know if I want to call it national news, but it was kind of national news. It was what was blown up to Twitter feeds and headlines and things of that nature. And that was serious enough as we started off with discussions about, race and privilege and weaponizing privilege and those sorts of things. And then I almost said unfortunately. Well, I don't even know if unfortunately is the word I want to use here. It doesn't feel strong enough. But tragically, we saw yet another death at the hands of the police by a black person. I won't even just say man, because with Breonna, I believe Taylor, that just happened a week or two ago as well. Another black person was killed at the hands of police. This time, Floyd George was choked to death on camera. In my hometown of Minneapolis, and not just in my hometown, but literally in basically the neighborhood that I grew up in. Spent a lot of my youth there in front of a store I've been in and frequented many times on streets. I've walked down, biked down, rode the bus past, drove past for years and years and years, right? So this one, I mean, a lot of, they're all hitting home, but, this one was a little different. As I'm watching the protests, and we'll speak to Pops here about it in a little bit, because he was down there, involved as he always is. But I saw a protest, down streets that, mean something to me, that are familiar to me, that I know like the back of my hand. And so when that happens, it just kind of hits home a little different. So I've had a real weird time kind of processing all of my feelings and emotions about all this. Will, it's been a lot of anger. I'm trying to harness that anger in a proper way. So when you ask how am I doing this week, Will, that's kind of where I've been. I've been processing and trying to figure out exactly how to express myself when it comes to things like this. So before we bring Pops in and get his initial thoughts, Will, how have you been just kind of perceiving and taking in all of this stuff that's been going on this week?
Yeah, I mean, we've said, this show again was birthed during the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. It seems like this is a continued repeat thing that we could literally talk about every week. And if it wasn't caught on video, who knows, what would happen. But I do think, I guess one of the things with this is, there's a lot of grief and lament that I think people need to be having. It's hard when we become numb to death, and numb particularly to the death of Black bodies. And we continue to see that. But I think this particular, at least as I think about this cultural moment in history, where we just saw, protests from white protesters with automatic weapons coming up in the Capitol over COVID-19 regulations, right? And then we see protests in response to a real justice issue, an actual state-sanctioned murder, essentially, right? and see the response from cops. So it's like a lot of things that people have been making philosophical questions are not philosophical questions. We're in a cultural moment where they're all facing together, right? Of what happens, how race relates to the way law enforcement works in this country, both in response to protests and both in response to killing, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think we're hitting a peak in terms of, like I said, things have been philosophical for some people before. Hopefully this breaks some of that for particularly white people like myself who don't experience things like that, to be able to all of it coming to a head. You can't deny what's happening in front of you, right? With everything being juxtaposed as it is, but it's certainly a time for grief and lament. So it's hard to factor all those things in.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Pops, Mel, wanted to throw it out to you. I mean, you have obviously been in the front line with this, and I know that our listeners don't all know you like I do, so they might not necessarily know your level of involvement in these things. But as someone that's been on the front line with not just the Florida George situation, unfortunately, but also situations like Philando Castile and others that have suffered in the Twin Cities area. What are your I guess initial thoughts, or most prescient thoughts that you have right now about this week's situation?
Well, like everybody else, I was upset. I think I've seen it so much that my first reaction was, I wasn't upset. I was kind of numb. It took me a while for it to really hit me. In fact, when it started to hit me, I think I sent you a text. So, man, I need a little extra prayer this week, today, because I knew it was going to be, nonstop. People were going to ask me questions, and as my responsibility with the paper, we got to get a story out. So I was just, there's no word to describe. I was a mixture of numb, upset. I kind of wasn't that upset because I've seen it too much. It was like, it sounds really terrible to say, here we go again. And the other little part of me as an activist was like, man, I was hoping I could rest, and I'm a little older, so I guess I am getting a little, I'm not, I probably should be in leadership a little more, but times have changed. And so people, they don't want to really listen to the old activists anymore. And that's unfortunate. And so I have a heavy heart today, right now, as we're speaking, because before we got on the call, I found out that we've been trying to organize and help organize, get in front of this so this wouldn't happen, because, the young people have been taunting the police and doing stuff. So now it's turned into a semi-riot over in the Target area that you're very familiar with, Kellen. They've actually looted the Target store and Aldi store, and I think even I heard the liquor store next door. So
this is in downtown.
That means
downtown Minneapolis.
No, not downtown. This isn't. No. This is off Lake Street in South Minneapolis.
Okay.
Right in the middle of South Minneapolis. There, it's a big mall area where several stores are and Target, and this is where it's across the street from the 3rd Precinct police station. And so I was out there filming. I was out there in March yesterday, and the end of it, I filmed some of them. Everybody else couldn't film, and so the anger is palpable. And I think also people are stressed out as a result of being locked down from the COVID. So those two things are coming together. So people, right? So people normally who might be able to think a little better are just stressed out and tense. And so I think it's a part of this. And I'm frustrated because I know that the efforts to get justice for George Floyd is going to be a little more difficult, because the press is going to highlight the struggle. They did yesterday. They said police, and even though we had a big peaceful protest, and near the end there was this conflict, they said police and protesters clashed. Nothing about justice for George Floyd. I know Kellen, I struggle with it. It's George Floyd. I sometimes want to call him Lloyd, but it's George Floyd. And I just heard, and I guess it's true, that he is related to
Stephen Jackson.
Yes.
So I'm not sure. I was looking into that. I'm not sure if he's actually. Steven Jackson called. For those that don't know, Steven Jackson is a former NBA player. He's also present now in the media. He would be what we would describe as as a real one. uh, but he made a video calling him his brother. I'm not sure if they're actual brothers or if they're just very close friends. They look alike, so he basically referenced that they call each other twin because they do look alike. So I'm not sure if it's his actual brother yet or his close friend. But either way, he's someone that Steven Jackson was close with.
And so, so that's all kind of connections. So anyway, today we spent trying to organize for a rally on Thursday, and what's happening today makes me realize that the rally tomorrow is really important. It's really important that we hold it together and make our clear demand. But I got to tell you, I'm not hopeless, but I don't know where we're going to go from here. People are frustrated. This reminds me of the '60s when the activists had organized. They knew what they're doing and organized everything, and you had the march, rally, the protest, and then folks rioted anyway, right? And it's like because people just are only going to take so much, and at some point, even your best laid efforts to try to get justice through I guess extra legal means, but peacefully, are just going to be laid aside because people are just too frustrated, and you can only push people so long before they push back.
That's an interesting point you make, Mel, when you speak about the '60s, because I know this is a conversation you and I have had, and I believe, Will, we've talked about it even on the podcast when we spoke about, kind of what is it going to take for people to do something, for things like this to stop, right? And we talked about, during the, when the civil rights movement was in full effect, people were at their wits' end. A lot of people felt like they didn't have much to lose. Their rights, their freedoms, their bodies were being taken from them. And so the decision to go on the street and march and face, dogs and fire hoses and jail and all those sorts of things was more of I believe from, what I wasn't alive then, from what I've seen and read, a lot of people felt like, hey, we have to do this, right? This is necessary. And something I've said often is that, a large part of the reason why I think people don't get out there and do those things now, and I'm not excluding myself from this, is that life is just a little too good for most people to have taken those steps. You have a little too much to risk. You maybe not dirt poor, maybe you got a decent job. You there's a little bit of a light, somewhere at the end of the tunnel. So that's enough to kind of keep you. I don't think I'm gonna risk going to jail today. I don't think I'm gonna risk being fired because I don't show up to work for a couple of days because we're protesting. A little while ago I was reading about the bread riots in Russia back in the World War I days, and people literally left the factories, didn't go to work, and they rioted or not necessarily riot, but they protested in the streets for days and days and days and days and days because they said we can't live with these conditions anymore. And I think what's starting to happen is that, especially with all these things being on video now, is people are finally starting to get to that point where they're saying this is no longer something we can live with at this level. I don't know. What do you guys think about that thought?
I don't know. I mean, the question is, are we to that? That's kind of what I was alluding to as well, is I feel like this is a cultural moment, at least a larger stepping stone in this, based off what I'm seeing off responses. Because I'm looking on, and social media is distorted in a lot of ways, but looking on social media, people that I've seen in my networks that previously wouldn't say anything or previously would say, wait for the facts type ideas and stuff like that, like are actually seeing the reality with this. And I don't know if that's the accumulation of, what's happened over really since 2016 and the accumulation of the Black Lives Matter movement and then the opposing, racial rhetoric of the Trump administration and the Trump cult that follows it. I don't know if it's the accumulation of all those things that's created this cultural moment. But I do feel like maybe we're getting to a place where people will actually risk something to bring about change. But I don't know. We have to see. We're right in the moment right now. So it could be like everything else, where it becomes I said something on social media, therefore I leave my guilt of participation, and now we move on with whatever happens next, and nothing actually changes.
Yeah,
That's my
but
worry.
I think that is a step, though. I mean, I actually noticed a similar thing of I saw some accounts of some of national folks that typically kind of remain silent in this, and
Right.
especially when we talk about from the Christian perspective, some kind of larger Christian leaders that will normally kind of say, well, hey, this is sad, let's pray for everybody, just kind of give a generic whatever, that'll come out saying this is wrong, this is evil, that are speaking much more directly than they ever have before. And even like, I know this is a personal anecdote, I know, but I even just briefly had a thought earlier that I said, I typically in these situations, one of my critiques of police and why I push back on the quote unquote good cop narrative is that oftentimes when these things happen, all the supposed good cops are silent, right? So I said, if they're so good, why do they never call out what their coworkers and colleagues are doing? And I said, I actually know a couple of police people that I grew up with that are police or whatever, and I went and checked out what they were saying on their social media, and the one I found quickly came out was like, this is wild, this is crazy. He said, had a couple choice words, and was basically really strongly denouncing not only the officers that were involved, but just the system, which I thought I've never seen that. Just quite frankly, I've never seen that happen. Now, granted, this is a guy that grew up in Minneapolis, but so you're right. I don't know. It seems like it might be different. I don't know. Dad, what do you think? I mean, you are really there, kind of on the ground. What do you think about that sentiment that things are maybe shifting a bit?
No, I think there's some truth to it. I noticed when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and since he was a runner, they had Arbery run, and it caught my attention that some little country police department came out and ran with the folks, and maybe it'd been like a police department like 8 people or 10 or 12. It was a small police department, but I could be exaggerating. Maybe it was a little bigger than that, but they came out, and I think every one of them participated in the race. And so folks were like, well, why y'all here? And they said, because we don't agree with what happened, and we want to make it clear that our department doesn't support that kind of thing. And it was a police department in like little Podunk, Georgia. And so you also saw responses online by people. And what lets you know there's some kind of sea change going on is, even when bad things would happen, people kind of, they say it and still, add qualifiers or modifiers. And that's terrible, that looks like, wow.
But what was he doing?
Like people like Gayle King, yes, they see it, and Gayle King was out. But what struck me and it's going to stay is Meghan McCain, who came out and said, "Well, that was 100% murder." Meghan McCain, who's pretty conservative, you got to hear her what she says on The View, and she says what I said. She says that she doesn't really think that Americans are going to. She said American, not just African Americans. She says I don't think Americans are going to put up with this much longer. Which since she's conservative, I think she's giving a warning to the people who run things that you're going to figure out how to chill, or you're going to lose the whole deal. You know what I'm saying? You're going to lose your control of this population. And with all the things that have been done on this pandemic, and that's a whole nother show, right, y'all? But you couple what's been happening economically and politically, and then this kind of social thing, and you saw the protests here. Yesterday, the protests in Minneapolis, and this thing was about 90-something% white. Yeah, it was. Because South Minneapolis is much more white than the other parts of the city or North Minneapolis. Now, it got a lot more black, a lot more dark when the march took place and when they got to the police station. But that's a telling thing. People are upset. That people are really, really, really upset. And I think we're not quite there yet, but, we're at the point where people are going to figure out, they're going to take sides. And you make a good point too, Will. A lot of folks who normally would be like, I don't know, the last few killings, more and more people are saying, well, there's something askew here, and this is what frustrates me sometimes with the Christian community, is that a lot of times, we've been sitting back and putting modifiers and qualifiers and things like, no, you if you love God, for crying out loud, saying, you got to speak up. for what's right. And, one of the things is we're supposed to hate evil and do good. You got to spend some time hating evil as well. And I'm mystified by it. Then I won't get into it, but I'm kind of mystified by a lot of Christians' response to some of the stuff that goes on. I honestly can tell you, I really don't understand what motivates. I have a clue what motivates them.
Yeah, and that's all. We've had that conversation a lot. The way that people pimp Jesus' name for whatever social cultural ideal they hold, which causes them to miss things like the image of God, some very basic things that would cause you to fight for justice.
Actually, both of you, I think, kind of made this point. One thing that this is not a new thought, because again, I believe I've talked about this before. I think what's happening with, whether it's conservatives or other people that are kind of shifting and speaking out when they normally wouldn't, is I think the lie is kind of being exposed. And I think for folks like us that are aware of these things, it may seem kind of silly. But I think there's a large segment of the population that survives with their head in the sand. I've often said, and Will, we've talked about it, I think one of the biggest things that keeps people from fighting racism or dealing with racism and things like that is that they don't want to actually have to confront the realities of the world they live in, because it'll force them to have to change their worldview, and in particular their view of America, which a lot of people put a lot of stock into the country that they're in, especially a lot of Americans. And if you have to actually take off the blinders, open your eyes to what this country really is in a lot of areas, I think it's dangerous. It affects people in a lot of ways, And so I think what's happening with these things being kind of put in everybody's faces at this point, you can't keep kind of holding on to this lie that, oh, well, everybody's equal, or even the lie that, racism is kind of dead. Those black people or brown people over there, they're just, they just ain't living right. They're just doing something. Oh, the police did something. Well, what was he doing wrong? Like all of those different excuses that people can kind of throw out there so that they don't have to deal with the realities. And I'm not talking about the people that are blatantly, obviously, and proudly racist. So, it's like kind of like the white moderate, like MLK talked about. The people that can just say, I don't think it's as bad as they say it is. Mm-hmm. These things, when you see Ahmaud Arbery being hunted down and tracked down by 3 white men with shotguns who feel like they can take the law into their own hands, when you see Breonna Taylor being shot by police who burst into her home while she was asleep and shot at her boyfriend, and then tried to charge the boyfriend with attempted murder because he had people burst into his home with guns and he fired back. And then you see a cop brazenly sit there with his knee on a man's throat with 2 other cops holding down other parts of his body, and another one standing there telling people that are saying, hey, he can't breathe, telling them to back off and to stay off drugs. You can't keep lying to yourself anymore. And I think that's kind of what's starting to happen. Whether it's conservatives or whoever, people aren't able to keep the mirage up anymore. And so, in my opinion, that is as impactful as anything, because when people have to start telling the truth to themselves, then I think change will start to happen. Mm-hmm. Or maybe I'm being naive. I don't know.
Well, no, life is more than, as we know, eating and drinking. We have to ask ourselves the question again, well, what constitutes life? And at some point, and Kellen's right, now a lot of people of color are kind of bribed into being a little more quiet. But at some point, people start to realize that life is about more than just having some stuff and being able to eat and drink and be merry. That, life is about having a bit of, self-respect, values and that kind of thing. In fact, I predict that if the police keep doing this kind of thing, that one of these times what we're going to see, and then it's really going to be on, as they say, the police is going to get caught attacking somebody and the crowd's not going to watch. That day is coming. And that's going to change a whole lot of things, because what it was saying to other people is that maybe we should not be afraid. And once people get over their fear, the people who run this society are really going to be in trouble. You can see it. It was close. It almost happened in the George Floyd situation. In fact, we've been talking with folks like maybe somebody to run at one of the cops, the one that with his knee, he might have gotten up to chase them, but they were close. They were really close to interfering. And at some point, people are going to push back. It's what's going to happen. I can see that happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that same thought, and I questioned myself. I said, if I was in that situation, what would I have done? And I don't know what conclusions I came up with because you never truly know until you're there. But I mean, at what point can we sit there and watch people be killed in front of us? And it's happened multiple times. This is not the first time that's happened. And he uttered the same phrase that we've heard before, which is "I can't breathe." So I believe, Pops, you mentioned earlier too about just kind of the anger that people are feeling. And, I'd be remiss if we had you on and didn't ask you this as someone with, obviously decades and decades and decades, close to a century really of experience dealing. But dealing with things and organizing in the community. I mean, what would you say to people that are maybe listening and feel like they care and they don't really know what to do? And they, what would you say to people in terms of, how can people make a difference? How can they start to, affect some level of change in their world? Just an average individual that maybe hasn't been involved in the fight or anything like that in the past, or maybe it's just kind of starting to be awoken to the realities of the world around us.
That's a good question. Well, people have to start from where they are. I remember Martin King, and a lot of people don't realize this. It's why he died. Is that him and Malcolm X are very similar. By the time they died, they had some pretty revolutionary perspectives. And there's a lot of reasons why people play down what they really think. At the end of the day, they both had problems with the system that we live under, the social, political, economic system. Now, I always just think the beauty of being a Christian is that you could give it all up. That if they're, what I'm saying, on some level, Christians have the potential to be the most revolutionary people in the world. And that, I know that sounds crazy, but think about it. The things that are important to Christians aren't the things that really exist on earth. A Christian could live off, some bread and soup most days and beans. I mean, think about it, because what's really important to them is their relationship with with their God and their fellow human beings. And so if that's not right, they can't be happy, right? And so since they know their reward is in heaven on some level, and God is going to bless them, so that they got nothing to lose. You got absolutely nothing to lose if society's not operating the way, and you can get out and do so. I said to say this, that people ought to start where they are. I say this when I speak all the time, that what you have to do, especially when people come out and realize this police file, that's a problem. So you see, that's a problem. You notice that the healthcare system wasn't taking care of people equally. You see, that's a problem. So you just don't close your eyes to it. You have to open your eyes. The only way you can change it is to look what's going on in the face. And you got to see, why in the world would a company put workers' lives at risk? You got to ask yourself that question. You got to look at right now, because those people saw making money more important than the lives of human beings. What changed my life on some level was, I went to Christian schools, went to Christian college, and I say this to people all the time. What motivated me, because I'm not as deeply involved in church as I was, because I'm actually trying to figure out another path because I'm just frustrated. But some people who know me well aren't surprised by this. But I tell them I began to do what I do because of my understanding of Christianity. It blows them away. But that's what motivated me. I was, my reading of the scriptures made me realize that I needed to dedicate my life to working for justice. And there's a calling, no doubt, so everybody can't do that. But you can do what you can. You can do some good. That, I say this to Black people lately a lot. So we know that kids get in the 4th grade and they can't read. There's some statistics say that their chances of winding up in the penitentiary are great. So I say to Black folks, so why aren't we organizing our communities to grab these 4th graders or late 3rd graders, people who graduate 3rd grade, and make sure they can read with after-school programs, summer programs? Those are things, tangible things that we can do. And so you have to start doing the things that you can do. What can I do that's right in front of me? But the other thing is, our problems are systemic. So we have to look at, you see a problem, you got to study it. There's a reason for this stuff. When I tell people, you want to deal with it, you want to understand and know what to do with it, like everybody else has, you've got to analyze your society. You got to say, this isn't right. Let me understand why it's not right. And of course, Americans are so programmed and propagandized, we don't even know history. So, for example.
Shout out Dr. G in his history class.
That's true.
Sorry, go ahead, Pop.
the police problem. So you got to say, well, why did the police do what they do? And what I did long time ago, I studied it. And when I uncovered it, said the police have a history. Their history dates back to slavery. Their history dates back to keeping immigrants in line. A lot of people don't know, everybody calls themselves white, but they don't know that, white Italians were not accepted in the United States. People called them some really bad names. Mm-hmm. People who were Irish were not white. People called them some really bad names, right? Jewish people look white now, and of course, they we still have anti-Semitism, but at one point they weren't accepted at all. So the police played the role of keeping them in their place, and then everybody else graduated to be white, and so what was left was the black people to oppress. So the police, I learned their real role. Their real role is to protect the folks in power, right? To reinforce the stereotypes that exist, as well as to protect the interests of private property. It's like, oh, that sounds terrible. But when you look at it, when you know the truth, what happens, it sets you free. And then you know what's going on. This is who they are. So we've got to organize to have either no police or a police department that deals with us as if we're human beings. And if you live in a society where that's not possible, then you do like me and some other folks. And I'm being facetious on some level, but this is how change happens. A lot of people come to the same conclusion that this is wrong. It's how we got the Christian movement, right? The disciples said, hey, I'm following that guy, Jesus, then I'm gonna do what he said, right? And we play it down now, but the early Christians were some bad folks, man. They followed their heart. They were serious about following Jesus. The Romans couldn't recruit them to their army. Christians we go and fight for the U.S. You couldn't make a Christian sign up to fight in the Roman army. Couldn't do it. Why? Because Christians didn't believe in killing people.
Yeah. Now you're kidding. Go ahead, God. I'm feeling it now. This is preaching to me now.
No, we're about to preach back. No, I was just going to ask something. You mentioned the truth shall set you free, and that's personally, that's the thing that drives me the most crazy is that so many people are so hell bent on denying the truth, and not even denying the truth, just refusing to seek it in any way, shape, or form. I've been in arguments with people online where they'll make a wild claim, let's say about police, like a couple years ago when they say, "Oh, it's a war on cops," and you'd say, "No, it's not. Here's the facts. Here's a link that tells you exactly what's going on," and police are in less danger than they have been in the past, and people are, citizens are in more danger. So explain how there's a war on cops, and people will actively say, "I'm not reading that crap. There's a war on cops," right? And so I'm always curious as to why it is that why it is so many people just simply refuse to allow the truth to set them free. And I touched on a little bit about what I think, but that's always driven me crazy, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, there's certainly a diseased social imagination you got to keep intact for your life to be intact, which is what you talked about, Kellen, right? There's worldviews intact that people want to keep that. And I think that's particularly a problem in the Western church because of its, political ties to right-wing conservative movements, right? Because now it's, you want to protect those things you've thought of as good, right? We hold up Billy Graham as a great hero, and he did some good things, but he also was in the pocket with, right-wing politics that was connected to race. So there's a lot of things that we have to start, which Mel, we have to know our history, right? Christians have the power, not just the power, but the basis to be the most revolutionary people. I think that's huge, right? Especially in nonviolent movements for justice, right? Which is what we saw with Martin Luther King. But we have to start acknowledging the history, asking the right questions. Right? James Cone said, while the church is busy debating about if Jonah was swallowed by the whale, right? The world is making inhumane laws against people to oppress them, right? And the church, who is called to a biblical view of justice that loves the oppressed and is willing to die on behalf of one another, right? That's a radical movement that can start. And we've kind of lost the way of, the martyr. That's the first 4 centuries of the church before it gets tied in with government and empire, is being willing to die because there is nothing to lose. If Jesus is king, right, and holds my life in his hands and calls me to love God and love one another, right, then I have nothing to lose, right? If I die, I live forever. What's it matter, right? So I can face everything up to death for the sake of justice. And it's going to take a lot of work to get particularly the white church in America there. The black church has been leading that in America, for centuries now, right? Since its founding. But the white church in particular has a long way to go. And it's going to start with rebuilding theology. It's going to start with social justice movements online to start exposing these lies, like you're saying, Kellen, to overwhelm. You can't keep up the mirage anymore. But I don't know. I think there's hope if we can start restoring what is the gospel, what is biblical justice, and what is happening in the world around us, and starting to show systems, bring people out of their super individualistic mindsets, which is what we're trying to do here, right? On the Wild Wild World, reunite righteousness and justice. You can't have personal, pious religion and not have social action to match it. That's what all the prophets in the Bible talk about. It can't happen, right? So we're going to start that now.
I was fascinated with the prophets, and you look at the Old Testament. Pretty much the theme is justice. The prophets are always talking about just and poor Jeremiah. And I think our times are very, very similar to Jeremiah, because the folks are running around. Just Jeremiah said, why you keep them out, Lord, Lord? You don't do what I say, and they keep talking about the temple. So none of that's not special about the temple. You're not treating your fellow human being, and that's not changed. That's still a gospel. If you say you love Jesus, then and the old apostles really held up to it. James and John. How you gonna say you love Jesus and you're not feeling your brother who's right in front of you? You see him every day. You cannot get untangled from that scripture, and that's what we have. And so it tells me that that Christianity really worships the culture. That's really what it's about. We worship the culture on some level. We worship ourselves. Right. And that's why we can't break from it, because even though things are wrong, he's like the good cop, bad cop guy. He feels like I ought to do this, but he's caught in that uniform. I always say to people, the good cops quit, and they do. The cops quit every year. There's a bunch of people who quit, and they'll tell you they quit because they couldn't do it anymore, couldn't take it anymore. And that's what Christians should be, where we just can't, we see something wrong and we don't have it all figured out, but they're protesting this thing. I'm going to join, even the war stuff, and we get caught in the parameters of being in the U.S. So we sit back and we think, the U.S. is bombing people and killing people. Well, all right. But the truth is be told that, God didn't want, if you have to defend yourself, it's one thing. But if the truth is absolutely told, we know that that's not right. That's why in old days, a lot of Christians were out in front of this movement. Your neighbors
killing
can't
people for
eat
economic gain.
Yes. Yeah. And it's wrong. So you got to stand up. For the reason, as I've been at things all day, I can't think of concrete examples, but there's things that happen right in front of you. For example, you have a nice church, and that you're near the hood, so to speak, and absolutely those kids in those schools are struggling. Well, adopt the school, right? Adopt the school. If nothing else, set up an after-school program. And then when you begin to see these kids struggling, you're going to ask more questions. Why are they struggling? You see, the whole race thing. One of the problems in the church, because remember, I was there, so I can tell you this, is that it's really crazy. But there are a lot of some Christians who don't really see other human beings as totally human. This is why the black folks and white folks, when they mix sometimes, they run into problems, because they just haven't laid it all down. Just give it up. It's a fellow human being. I used to tease kids when I used to speak. I said, listen, they say, well, they would act, I would come to forums, or people invite me to speak and say, well, Brother Mel, do you think that the cops need special training and this and that? And I would say, listen, if you see somebody and they've got two eyes, a nose, a mouth, some ears, opposing thumbs, that's a human being. You don't need no special training to learn how to treat another human being.
That's it right there. Yeah.
Briefly, all of our Wild Wild World listeners to check out Stitcher Premium. Stitcher Premium is an app, or Stitcher is an app, and the premium subscription to Stitcher includes bonus episodes, and exclusive shows from hit podcast hosts. Gives you early access to popular podcasts and ad-free shows. We're rolling now. So if you use the premium code Wild World, not Wild Wild World, Wild World, just one Wild, you get Stitcher Premium free for 30 days. All right. So what do you get with that Stitcher Premium? Again, you get excellent comedy podcasts like Comedy Bang Bang or WTF with Mark Maron, or one of my favorites, How Did This Get Made? Or get true crime shows like Criminology, or even pop culture shows like LeVar Burton Reads. You remember LeVar Burton, Reading Rainbow? You know the song. It's probably in your head right now. I'm not going to sing it because I'm not going to do that to you. But anyways, Stitcher Premium is typically $4.99 a month or $34.99 for the year. But again, our listeners can get it free for 30 days with that code Wild World. So check that out, please, and thank you. Just a little benefit for our Wild Wild World listeners, including y'all 2023 peeps. Appreciate you. I don't know if it'll still be good then, but you can try. Anyway, so we've been talking, and obviously, you know, it's been a heavy week, and there's been tragedy and pain and sorrow. But I did just want to briefly, before we let Pops go here, want to talk about something that, if you've been listening, you know, we've been talking about. And it just so happened that my father popped on this Zoom, and behind him is a poster of Michael Jordan. He is strategically placed right in the middle of the poster there, of the Jordan Jumpman poster. And again, we've been talking about it for a couple weeks. And he actually, a week ago, that wrote an article about Michael Jordan, and, you know, specifically with everything that's been going on with The Last Dance, and talked a little bit about the cult. Was it The Cult of Michael Jordan? Is that the title?
I call it
Gospel.
Oh, The Gospel. I'm sorry. I call it a cult because people are obsessed. But The Gospel of Michael Jordan. And, you know, we've talked a lot about the Last Dance series and related to different things in life, like media and truth and whatnot. And we did touch on a previous show, just you know, kind of Michael Jordan, the legend, and what he did or didn't do for folks. But I also wanted to just ask you if you could just briefly touch on, you know, kind of what your article is about, because I found it very interesting, especially in this time of Jordan worship that's been going on. What were your thoughts generally on the Last Dance series?
I mean, you know, as far as just watching the Bulls' success, I think, you know, it was a good series in that regard. But if it didn't examine, if it doesn't rate with any of the 30 for 30s or 60 with it 60 minutes, 60 E60s I've seen much more engaging. And so Michael Jordan had control of this. And so my commentary criticized Michael for being quiet. And ironically, even when he did his commentary, he was quiet about what was going on. You know, the sports thing that captivates you, right, is like, you know, one of my favorites, and I won't throw my pitch out. One of my favorites, 30 for 30, is, you can guess, Kellen, the U, right? And
part one or part two, both?
Both. I'm a Hurricane fan, man. Kellen, tell you, I'm from Miami, man. I've been a Kane fan since they couldn't win a game to save their lives. So I'm a real guy. I've been a Kane fan for 50 years. Over 50 years.
That's not lying. We know anyway, we know it's about 75.
Yeah, well, that's a long time to be a fan. But anyway, the series, the 30 for 30s, they actually captured the social surroundings and social settings. Just like, you know, how when you study the word, you know, you said you got to study the social setting, right? So Michael Jordan left out the social setting. Right, It was all focused on him, what was going on with the team and what have you. But that was, I think, it gave you a glimpse into who Michael Jordan is and how he thinks even to this day, because it wasn't that important. Michael Jordan is like, that's why I call it the gospel of Michael Jordan. He's the epitome of of a selfish human being and of a narcissist. Now, I like him. I think he played great ball, but my commentator called him out because there was an expectation, and you see it drop now too. There's an expectation because Black people are accepted. We are oppressed people. Oppressed people, when they have people who get the spotlight, there's an expectation that it's not carried out like it was before, that you say something on behalf of the group, the oppressed group you come from. And ironically, Michael Jordan comes from Wilmington, North Carolina, where in 1898, there were black people running the city. The white KKK, white supremacists gathered together and they overthrew an elected city government. You won't learn that in history because they don't want you to know that kind of things happen. They overthrew it. And in the 1960s, early 1960s, they were trying to integrate the Wilmington school system. A bunch of young people were organizing to make sure the integration process was equitable, and they fought back out again. And what wound up happening was the vigilantes burned down a building and blamed some black folks in a church, by the way, who have been meeting in the church right next door to this building. And they were framed up. It's called the Wilmington 10. You can look it up. Famous case. Dr. Ben Chavis, who's now the head of the national newspaper, so he was one of the famous Wilmington 10. Anyway, so Michael Jordan, this happened in the early 60s. Michael Jordan was born, around that time. And so it wasn't like when he grew up, he hadn't heard about it. He didn't know about the strife. So he made a conscious decision not to say anything. And so I called him out because Jabbar said that he chose commerce over conscience. And then when he had an opportunity to do something for folks, he never did it. When one of the most racist senators at least in modern times, was representing North Carolina, Strom Thurmond. Was it? I can't remember. Jesse Helms.
Yeah,
it was Jesse Helms. No, I can't remember. Someone ran against him, and even in his show, he did let us see that he actually said, when they said, "Hey man, why aren't you going to support the mayor of the Charlotte at the time?" I can't think of his name for whatever reason. And Michael said, "Well, I don't know him." So this is why I mess with him, because Michael comes off like a god. What I started off with saying that even in the series, Michael, remember Larry Bird said that Michael Jordan was God in a basketball uniform. Mm-hmm. And in the series, if you notice, they asked Michael Jordan if he was a god, and he laughed it off. He didn't say he wasn't. I don't know if y'all paid attention to that. So I did a takeoff and said, well, yeah, he's a god, but he's a god of mammon. He's a selfish god, right? And so, and taking on the theme of him being God, I can't remember where I was going with that, but he kept silent. Harvey Gantt is his name. Oh, yeah. I said that, everybody worships him like he's God, but everybody knows that Jesus, when his mother Mary asked him to make some more wine, he didn't argue about, he didn't know the people at the party, he just made more wine. Right? But Michael Jordan, he denied his own mother, right? He was so serious about making sure he made money. So the piece is about black people were catching HELL in the 80s and 90s when he was reigning supreme on the basketball court. And, there was a crack epidemic. There was a mass incarceration came along. They over-sentenced and penalized black folks and criminalized them. Lots of stuff was going on. Rodney King got beat almost an inch of his life. And they asked him about the LA riots as a result of the unjust verdict that came out of it. And Michael Jordan said, well, he didn't know much about it. So, he lied. And then I'll make the point that he made a point, not only of not speaking up for black, but he made a point of not speaking. He made a point of it. And he made a point of standing up, being a pitch man for Madison Avenue. So that was the gist of it. And I closed it out by saying that, when it came to the social justice, Michael shot air balls. And that, while we were out here catching all kinds of sand, balls, that Michael opened, Michael opened not his mouth.
Yeah,
that was his gospel.
And that's part of why the whole Jordan worship thing baffles me a little bit. And to me, it has to be marketing. Like, it just has to be. People have to be consumed with what they were given and provided and marketed to. Yes, he was obviously great on the basketball court, and yes, that inspires some level of feelings and whatnot, right? But the level of, I guess, love people have for Jordan, it baffles me because there's never been anything human that he's given to people. And you mentioned, like, one thing I was thinking as you talked about, Michael Jordan was the most famous athlete in the world based out of Chicago in I don't know when you exactly want to say he became the most famous athlete, but like you said, the late 80s and the 90s. And he was doing so in one of the cities in America most affected by things like the crack epidemic, gang violence, mass incarceration, all of those things. We know like I have images in my head of like, oh, everybody wants those Bulls jackets, but you can't necessarily wear them Bulls colors. We heard about people literally being killed for Jordans. It's actually still happening on some level, because there was a story about it not that long ago, right? He had the most popular shoe in the world at a time when wearing his shoe in his city could get you jumped, beaten, or killed, right? And he never did anything. Let me not say he didn't do anything for anybody, because I know there are some things that he did, on the low key, and I've heard about him kind of donating money here and there. But I don't get why all these people love him so much when he sat back and did nothing and said nothing, at least publicly, while quote unquote his people, like you said, were going through it, going through it sometimes as, maybe it's not fair to say a direct result, but on some level as an indirect result of his products. You know what I mean? And, we look at athletes now, like the LeBrons of the world or whatever, that speak up on these things going on to a point. And it's even to the point where now if an athlete doesn't speak up, people kind of look at him and say, like, especially black guys, like, oh, what's up with you? Why don't you say anything? But yet and still, we worship Jordan as this deity who absolutely refused to speak on even the most obvious things. Like you said, Rodney King. Was Jordan opening up after school programs for kids in Chicago? Was he, like, everything we ever heard about Jordan was, like his dream camp or whatever, to cost like $20,000 for middle-aged men to go to, or what? And again, I'm sure he did some things or whatever, but I've lived in the Chicago area for years, and I have not heard anything about, oh yeah, Jordan used to do this thing growing up, or back in the day, he used to have his camp. I grew up in Minneapolis. I can tell you of camps that were around and that we went to from different athletes in the city or whatever, you know what I mean? Like people that did things for kids. You don't hear none of that with Mike. But people love him to death, and it drives me a little nuts. I'm not going to lie. So I'm sorry if I'm going on a little tangent here. Y'all might roll your eyes, but I don't get it. And even with this whole this documentary, as I've spoke on things like that, like people don't really have answers either. They say, oh, well, Mike was great. We say, well, they didn't touch on these things that you mentioned there, Dad, or even he blatantly lied about things that we know aren't true, like the whole Isaiah thing. And, why didn't they go deeper into that? Like people will actually black people will push back and kind of be mad, like, oh, well, Mike is great. Don't be a hater. Da, da, da. It's like, okay, so basically we're just like, hey, you were great at basketball. Even though you ain't had no love for us and didn't do nothing for us or actively avoided being involved in your community, we still gonna treat you like you could do no wrong, and I don't get it. I'm done. Ran over.
So this is just more points for LeBron as the GOAT. We're confirming that again another episode in a row.
Well, you're gonna get us jumped if you keep with this LeBron as the GOAT thing. Like,
yeah, you're gonna get people in trouble, man.
I've been trying, man. Hey, but we're gonna put a better human being and a better ball player. I'll leave it there. No, we'll put a link to this to the article in the show notes as well, though, for y'all to read it. But people know I'm not joking, though. I'm very serious about LeBron being the GOAT.
He is dead serious about LeBron. LeBron brought Cleveland the ship. He brought Cleveland the championship. So LeBron is my favorite player, but I'm not saying he's not a better basketball player than Jordan, but he is. Yeah, I would much prefer. I'm glad I got to grow up in the era watching LeBron versus watching Jordan just be kind of a ruthless sociopath that won and did nothing else for anybody. That's like basically my thing with Jordan is if he'd have lost a couple of those championships, the whole aura would have been different, right? So he didn't do anything for anybody. So basically, all he brought to anybody was you could say that your favorite player at the time was winning ships, and that's basically all it is. And for a lot of people, I guess that's fine. Sports is entertainment, and I guess your favorite player or team winning is entertaining. But it doesn't seem like a type of person I would necessarily want to be rooting for, which is the same thing I said about Kobe back in the day. And luckily it seems like, obviously rest in peace, Kobe, but it does seem like he's a person that as he got older and matured, he became much more human, much more caring and relational and whatnot. When he came in the league, he was just kind of the same thing, a killer. He was the guy to say, I'll have friends when I retire, that sort of thing. And Jordan kind of seems to still be like, nah, screw y'all. Like, I'm about these dubs and nothing else. So I don't get it.
That dude's got to be lonely. He just seemed that way in the documentary. I mean, just like the way he would answer everything, it's just like, man, you're holding grudges for all these years about a game, man. Like,
well, if you notice,
crazy.
even I had somebody tell me that, oh, well, his teammates, they were talking about his methods or whatever. They're like, oh, well, all his teammates that were interviewed, they agree with him. I said, one, well, he was in control of us. Yes, all his teammates that they interviewed or that they played the interview. Yeah. But even still, even with that, even with being a Jordan control, nobody really had like glowing, warm things to say about him as a person. Like if you notice, I don't know if anybody ever go back and watch it again. Like the most they would say is like, yeah, his methods were hard, but yeah, I guess that kind of worked, or he did kind of push guys. Like it was almost like begrudging respect. There was not a whole lot of love and warmth, even from guys like Pippen and Phil Jackson. They weren't like, yeah, Michael's a great guy. Yeah, we loved playing with Michael. Yeah, we enjoyed this experience, or yeah, I'm really glad that he did things. Nah, there was none of that crap. It was just kind of like, yeah, we won, and it worked, and it kind of sucked, but. I guess, hey, we're on a documentary 30 years later, or 20 years later, so, hey, it must have worked on some level. So, anyways, that's enough Jordan slander for one episode, Will.
We've done it. I think we've done it, 5 episodes in a row we've slandered Jordan.
Hey, it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, man. Hey, but even Steve Kerr, right? He's speaking out about stuff today. Michael Jordan's not saying anything yet. No. Even today.
A lot of people with a lot less job security than Michael Jordan.
That's what I'm saying.
Say. Yeah,
it is what it is. But yeah, you should read that article, listeners. I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Yeah. But you all realize that Michael Jordan represented the culture. This is why you can't worship the culture. He was the extreme version of. He was. In fact, I say that I was joking to say he was the creation of the culture. I jokingly said he was created by capitalism or something. Because remember, the only thing that was important here was winning. And this is where we get dangerous. I can remember being in church and hearing pastor talk about winning and losing. I thought, ooh, I remember thinking this could go down the wrong road, right? Yeah. Because everything is not about, what do you mean winning, man? Yeah. Don't you mean cooperating? If we're playing a game, you want to win. But then the game's over, we move on, right? But we should be about setting up a society in which people are cooperating. That's what we do in church on some level. The small micro it's odd that people sit in church and they work with each other, do stuff. Of course, there's fights in church, no doubt. But we have kind of a cooperative relationship, right? Then we leave church and we get to compete with folks, and you know what I'm saying? And we hammer some people and keep walking away. And you know what I'm saying? We compete with folks, we beat some people out, and we never think, whoa, let me go back and see how that person is. Maybe we could do this differently where we could all win, right? Because we live in a society where you only have a few winners and everybody else is designated to lose, right? Why do we have to have a boss that says, all right, $1 for you guys, $5 million for me, $1 for you, $5 million for me? Right?
It is really interesting that, I think about all the lessons I've, been taught, whether in life and movies or whatever, whenever there's something about either the beginning of a society or even the construction of a great society, like how did the United States come about, or Rome, or all these, it ends up being on some level about cooperation. Different people groups come together and form something. They can work together and, they're building something bigger and greater than themselves. But then somewhere the narrative shifts, at least from, how we're taught in school, whatever, to now go out there and compete with each other. Now it's not about cooperating, like you said. Now it's about competing with each other, being better than the next man, instead of connecting your puzzle pieces with other folks and figuring it out. But there's a beautiful thing, that's how we first got cities and towns, because people came together and stopped being nomadic scavengers or whatever, and came together and cooperated. But now all of a sudden cooperation is a bad thing, and if you talk too much about it, they'll call you a commie. So
and then I don't know what they do with that part, in Acts. It's like, the Christians are shared everything common. You don't hear too many sermons about that. You don't hear many sermons about that part of Acts. I did skip all that. They were doing what? It was let's move on.
Well, there was a title of a sermon I heard one time, and I can't even remember where it might have been. Your boy Vody Bacham. Well, might have been.
That ain't my boy. I don't know. I know. Boys.
I was just like getting a reaction out of you. But I believe it was titled, "Are you more American or Christian? Are you more American than Christian?" Something of that nature. I'll have to find it. Maybe we'll put that in the show notes. But Anyways, well, look, I think this is a good time to wrap it up because we can just go on, 20 different roads here and tangents. But we're at about a nice tight hour right now, so want to respect you guys' drive home. Psych, you're not driving home because most of y'all still in quarantine. But whatever, it's your lunch break, whatever you're doing, listen to the podcast. We appreciate you. But want to give a quick thank you once again to you, Mr. Melvin Reeves. Mel Reeves. He don't like when I call him Melvin. So thank you very much for coming on. We'll definitely have to have you again. We got resources here in the back of our pocket, as my dad always says. Use the resources you have. So obviously, we hope to have you on under more pleasant circumstances next time, as the world continues to burn all around us. But once again, you can check Mel out at Melanius1 on Twitter. That's MELLANEOUS, the number 1 at Twitter. Again, he's also the proprietor of FightThePowerJournal.com. Again, that's FightThePowerJournal.com. And also, he is a writer and the editor of the Minneapolis Spokesman Recorder. So you can check out his work there. In general, but also specifically as you follow along with the story. If you follow along with the Floyd George story as well, he will certainly keep you updated there. So please check that out. Will, where can the people catch us at?
KingdomDreamer.com, patreon.com/Kingdom Dreamers. Support the movement. And I'm ready for this talk about capitalism, the nature of capitalism. Maybe that's next episode. We'll see.
Oh, the juices are now flowing.
Y'all got me fired up, man.
You're going to start some trouble. Because, I run into Christians who say that capitalism is ordained by God. And I'm not.
Oh, yeah. See? This is another one. We're going to bring your past back on, Kellen. We're going to have this conversation.
So the three of us will be back next week.
We're going to have this conversation.
Oh, yeah. It's coming. It's coming. So,
its days are numbered, boy. Its days are numbered because people are looking and going, "Whoa, is that this system we living under? Man, this kind of people are starting to go, ooh, right? It's kind of rough on this joint. I didn't know it was this bad. People the pandemic is opening people's eyes. I tell you that much."
So look, so if that's giving you a little taste, so maybe we'll definitely have to make this happen soon while we are still in the midst of this pandemic here. So Pops, get me on your calendar somewhere. I know you got a busy schedule, but thank y'all for listening. Check us out, please. Like, subscribe, download, share with your friends. All our 2022 and 23 peeps, appreciate y'all as well. We will catch y'all next week here on the Wild Wild World Show. Appreciate y'all.
Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Wild Wild World Show. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Follow us on Twitter at KingdomXDreams and learn more at KingdomDreamer.com.
This podcast is sponsored by Logos Bible Software. If you've been longing for the tools to take your Bible study deeper, you need to try out Logos. I've been personally using Logos for over a decade now for both my devotional and pastoral study. Right now, Logos has partnered with the Kingdom Dreamers to bring you exclusive savings. Check out at logos.com/Kingdom Dreamer or click the link in the show notes for our exclusive offer.